Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today on this episode of Sonar Fishing, we're going to be talking about one technique that when April rolls around every year, I'm chomping at the bit to tie this technique on, this rig on, and go catch some fish that are up shallow and spawning, whether around docks or any type of isolated cover or just cruising along the shoreline. This is a technique that absolutely just kills it out here, especially around, the Tennessee River area, anywhere in this region of the country, this eastern Tennessee area, all the way, you could fish it all the way west too. It's just whenever the fish are spawning, this is a technique that's absolutely going to crush it. And specifically for my area, that means April. And so I'm going to discuss this real quick, but first, I want to give a big thank you to you guys. The Sonar Fishing channel reached 10,000 subscribers today, which is a huge milestone for me. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you guys entrusting me with being able to give you all this fishing information. And I just really enjoy it. I really enjoy answering your questions and just talking fishing. It's one of my favorite things to do. So and for you guys to subscribe and help me reach that 10,000 subscriber mark is fantastic. So thank you guys very much. The next goal is 15K. That is the next goal, and hopefully we'll reach it. I'm hoping by August. It's a lofty goal, but I think we can get there. But anyways, let's talk about the technique that I love throwing in April the most. So this technique, I've talked about it many times before, but every single year I have to brush up on it because it is just so good. And that is the Wacky Rig. This is one of the most simple techniques or rigging options for a soft plastic in bass fishing. It's essentially a small hook. Okay, a lot of people use a lot of different styles of hooks, but it has a small hook and then a weightless rigged stick bait. You can also use just any straight tail worm. One of the biggest fish I ever caught in Connecticut. We've got a lake house up there. I caught it on a sluggo, which is like an old school, jerkbait style soft plastic, and I wacky rigged it, and I caught like one that was like 8.5, which is a massive fish in Connecticut in that region. But yeah, it's essentially just a soft plastic stick bait or straight tail worm hooked right through the middle. And just fish very, very, subtly, just essentially casting it out there, letting it fall on its own weight, and just kind of let it do its thing. The Wacky Rig is very, very simple. It's one of the techniques that I really suggest for beginner fishermen. So if you're looking to get into the sport and just start catching some fish, and especially if you're fishing like from the shoreline and like farm ponds or golf course ponds or any small fishery like that, this is one of the best techniques to use. But even on big lakes, especially on like Lake Chickamauga or any of the reservoirs around here, when the fish are shallow, a Wacky Rig like this is probably my number one choice. And the reason for that is there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, it's a finesse approach. So a lot of the fish are getting really pressured this time of year because they're moving up shallow. They're more vulnerable to just about every fisherman out there. And so having a finesse technique that's very subtle and just isn't as in your face as a lot of the other power fishing techniques out there is a real benefit this time of year. And another thing that is really good about the Wacky Rig is the fact that it can stay in the strike zone for a long period of time. So what I mean by that is, especially during the spring when the fish are spawning, they have smaller strike zones a lot of the times because if they're on the bed, they've got a real small strike zone, essentially just the diameter of their bed. And so what you can do with the Wacky Rig is you can cast it out to either a bed that you see, some fish that you can actually visually see on the bed, or you can cast to likely cover, isolated cover such as, stumps are a real big type of cover out here for spawning fish. dock posts, just a random stick up out there in the water, a grass line, anything like that, fishing around reeds. Those are all great situations to throw the Wacky Rig. And those are all great situations because those are all type of areas where those fish are likely to make their beds. And a Wacky Rig, you cast it out there, it's not moving horizontally. You know, the best way to fish it is just cast it out there and let it fall on its own weight. And it just kind of shimmies on the way down. If you have the right style worm, which is why a lot of guys use these stick baits, as we call them, a little bit wider bodied, heavily salted straight tail worms, they kind of shimmy on the way down, and they land, you know, when they hit the water, they just fall straight down, shimmy all the way down, have that nice subtle action to them. And so they're staying in the strike zone for a long period of time, as opposed to other baits, you know, something like a chatterbait or a spinnerbait or a crankbait. Those baits are, you're casting out there, reeling real fast, they're moving through the strike zone very quickly. And those baits are really good for getting a reaction strike. But if a fish needs a little bit more coaxing, you know, this is the best way to catch them, in my opinion, especially in clear water. You know, once you get into really dirty water, you know, maybe some techniques that are a little bit more, you know, big body baits, creature baits, jigs, things like that, those may be a little bit better in those scenarios. But anytime you can see the bottom in, like, you know, a foot, 2 foot of water, a Wacky Rig is going to do really, really good. So let's talk a little bit about the tackle that I'm going to be using. First off, let's talk about the Wacky Rig. So essentially the Wacky Rig is 2 components. If you want to keep it really simple, there's some other things that you can get to make it a little bit more you know, complex, or to customize it for certain situations. But essentially you got that straight tail worm or stick bait like this. This is the Z-Man Zinkers. Okay, and this is actually a killer color that has been around with a lot of different brands in some form or fashion over the years. Usually it's called Baby Bass, but Z-Man just came out with the color Game Changer, which is an incredible color this time of year. It's a little bit like a transparent green gray with a little bit of black flake and gold flake in there, and that is just for me, like, the go-to color. This is the only color you really need this time of year. You know, when those fish are just hitting the banks, it just, for some reason, just has the perfect tint to it compared to the tint of the water this time of year. So you got the stick bait, and then you've got a hook. I like to use a hook that is specially designed for fishing a Wacky Rig, and I use the Hayabusa WRM 201. This hook right here is really good because it is a wide hook. Okay, it's a wide gap finesse hook. All right, so it's got that wide you know, design to it. It's got a very sharp hook on it. It's got a fairly short shank, and also it's got a medium wire. I think that's really important. There's a lot of light wire options out there, and then there's some heavier wire options. I like that medium wire because, you know, I want a wire that is still light enough to get a good solid hook set with light line, but one that still has enough strength that I can horse fish away from cover if I need to, which I'm always fishing this around cover. I'm not necessarily fishing it in cover, but like I said, like if I'm fishing a line of docks, which are a great type of cover this time of year, you know, I'll skip it underneath the docks around the dock pilings and the floats, and I need to get those fish away from that cover. Same thing with stumps or anything else. I'm not necessarily like throwing this in heavy grass or heavy vegetation or anything like that, but I'm throwing it to the edges of things. And so I need a little bit of strength in that wire to get those fish out without bending out the hook. All right, so another thing that I want to kind of show you guys is a real quick kind of bonus tip. Another thing that a lot of people will do, you know, this Zinkers here is very, very durable because it's made of Elastec, and so I don't really have a problem just hooking taking the hook and just hooking it right through the soft plastic. And you can do that with pretty much every single stick bait out there and have a lot of success. But other plastics, you know, you might lose a lot more. You're definitely going to lose a lot more, whether you're catching fish and they shake it off coming back to the boat, or you have a situation where you're skipping it and you just happen to you know, throw it off the hook, whatever the scenario is. You're going to lose a lot of these stick baits if you're not using the Elastec material. So they have a tool out here that is specifically designed for helping with that type of scenario, and it's a Wacky Rig O-ring tool. And so one of the things that guys will do is you bring this O-ring over here, and then you've got the wide end that you put the soft plastic stick bait or straight tail worm in, and then you just put the O-ring on there, okay? And then you just, if you have one O-ring, you're essentially hooking it like this, okay? And the cool thing about adding the O-ring, okay, is if you are just hooking the hook or the bait with just the hook and no O-ring, you're hooking it like this, so it's actually like cross orientation. So the hook point is perpendicular to the worm, okay? But when you put one of those rings on there, it's actually going to be parallel with the worm. So this makes it a little bit more weedless too, which is really a good benefit of doing it this way. Is if you're fishing around a lot of brush or things that you're likely to get snagged on, this is a good way to protect the hook a little bit without having to use a hook that has like a weed guard or something like that. But there's also another way that you can do this. If you do want a better hooking percentage, which means that to have that hook where the point is perpendicular, or the hook is perpendicular to the worm, but you don't want to be losing a bunch of worms by just hooking the worm, you know, without an O-ring, you can take it and put a second O-ring in kind of a crisscross fashion. That one did not work, but I'm gonna fix that. So as you can see there, it's kind of in a crisscross fashion. And so what I'm gonna do is take the hook and I'm going to hook it in between those two rings, just like that. Once I actually get it, messed it up. There we go. So just like that. So now you've got the O-rings that are going to help you keep this bait on and make you go through less baits, but you've also got that perpendicular hooking situation that is really good for open water, fishing docks and things like that, where you're not really going to snag on anything, but you want a better hooking percentage. So that's less weedless, but a little bit more sticky. You know, when the fish bite it, you're going to hook them with that orientation. So let's talk about the rest of the rig that I'm using with a Wacky Rig. All right, so the rod that I'm going to be using, I've actually got two different rods that I like for this technique. One is this one right here. This is a 7.2 medium heavy Versa series spinning rod. I always like to use spinning rods with a Wacky Rig. I just feel, you know, more confident in this type of setup. But I also use a 610 medium heavy Versa series, and the reason why I use two different ones is if I'm fishing more, you know, like stumps or brush, casting around things that I could potentially get snagged in, or I want the fish to be led out of, like I really have to put a little bit of horsepower behind getting those fish away from those pieces of cover, then I want to use the 7.2 that just has a little bit more leverage, a little bit more backbone, and you know, that one I really like for those situations. But if I'm fishing more dock type situations where I'm skipping, I want a shorter rod that's a little bit easier to maneuver and all that, the 610 is kind of where I go to. But really, either of these rods are good for pretty much any situation. So if you can only afford one, get either of them. They're both great. And as far as the line that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be spooling all the line on a S4000 spinning reel. This is the Fitzgerald Stunner. You know, any 3000, 4000 size spinning reel is going to work. Even 2500s will work. And I use a backing line of braid. So my main line is going to be 20-pound test Seagar Smackdown braid. And then I tie a fairly short leader compared to like some of my other techniques that I use a somewhat shorter leader with a Wacky Rig. I'm going to be using about 10 foot of leader, maybe a little bit less. And I use the Gold Label fluorocarbon. That is my favorite leader material. It's smaller per diameter, so it's like, you know, compared to other brands or other fluorocarbons, you know, I can use 10-pound test line diameter, but I'm getting 12-pound test rating. So you can actually upsize the strength of your line while downsizing the diameter, and which I really like for this technique. And I usually only use 10 or 12-pound test. Unless I'm really in heavy cover or really in clear water with very little cover, I'm going to be going with a 10 or 12. And, you know, if I'm in that clear water, I might go down to 8, but really you want a line that you can lead fish away from the cover that you're casting to, because it's all target oriented. It's random cover that you're casting to. But anyways, guys, you know, this technique right here, like I said, the main ingredient or the main thing that you need to focus on is just letting this bait do its thing. It's not a bait that you cast out there and reel back to the boat. It's a bait that you cast out there, let fall on a semi-slack line, watch your line. If you see it jump or pop, you know, you'll see that little, that telltale like tick, tick, you know, that little tick that lets you know that the fish has it. But let it fall on its own weight. That's the beauty of this rig, is that it has that nice shimmy, that nice horizontal falling action that does really, really good this time of year for the spawning fish. It's just a magical rig for fishing all throughout the spawn, not just in April, but for this part of the country, April is definitely the month to be throwing a Wacky Rig. But anyways, guys, let me know if you have any more questions about the Wacky Rig and the situations that I throw it in, and make sure that you check out the affiliate links in the description below for the links to the products that I just talked about today. And if you use those links, you can get 10% off of your order, and it's a great way to support the channel. Also, some other great ways to support the channel is I'm going to be, now that we're at 10,000 subscribers, YouTube actually opens up a merchandise option for me. So I'm going to be doing some merch. We're going to be doing some SonarFishing sweatshirts, hats, shirts. We're going to see what else we're going to do. But if you guys are interested in any of that, keep an eye out for that merchandise. I'm really excited to see some people wearing some SonarFishing stuff. And also make sure you ask questions. I love answering questions in videos just like this. So if you have any questions, it helps me come up with more content and help support this channel. So thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. I'm going to see you out on the water.